Hi guys, my name is Britton Domgard. I did my video on an article called The Human, Economic, Social, and Political Costs of COVID-19. And just to get right into it, so when a new virus that causes disease in humans is discovered, scientists called epidemiologists work together with other scientists to figure out who has it, why they have it, what health problems it causes, and what the CDC can do about it. So, with COVID, for example, it was a 55-year-old individual. Why? They got food from a wet market. Where? In Wuhan, China. When? December of 2019. And what was it? It was the COVID illness. What can the CDC do about it? We had something called the vaccine race, which I will get into. And we had learned in a lecture about how human health is linked to animal and environmental health. So that's kind of interesting, how these diseases are being caused within these animals. We're consuming them, it affects us. And what we need to know is that usually there's two approaches to an epidemiological study, and they're divided into two types, retrospective and prospective. Retrospective describes whether the events have already occurred, and prospective describes whether the events may occur in the future. COVID was both. We have to look back at what has happened as well as what will happen and the future effects that it'll have even further down the road. This reminded me about the four epidemiological states that the world has gone through, and right now we're in the fourth, which is the reemerging and emerging diseases, so measles and mumps, or the overuse of antibiotics, new flu strains, new diseases altogether, like COVID. And all of this has a human cost. For example, persistent, lifelong pulmonary damage and cardiac complications. People who have had severe illness with COVID-19 might experience organ damage, affecting the heart, kidneys, skin, and brain. Inflammation problems with the immune system can also happen. More men actually died of COVID-19 and are affected, and they actually don't know why. It's either due to an occupational risk, biological sex hormones, or just their immune response. But those are the few ideas that they have about that. Another really sad thing is that more Black people died because of factors of discrimination, low levels of health insurance, access to healthcare, lower education, lower income, and household conditions that made them more susceptible to COVID, which is really sad. That's part of the health inequality that we have here. And there's also the socioeconomic inequalities have had an impact on the effects of COVID-19, not only within individual countries, but as on a global scale. Many lower and middle income countries face significant economic contractions in terms of growth and income levels as a result of the pandemic. Even in the United States, we had a lot of the unemployment rate was really high and nobody was spending money. It caused the economy to go into kind of a scary place. Which brings me to the next thing, which is the economic cost of COVID. In this article, it talks about how universities didn't get as many international students, and international students pay more. And so there was that economic cost. With COVID-19, there was also social costs. There was curfews. I remember in Miami, that was a big issue. Technology was a save-all. The only time that you could kiss your grandchild was through a phone. There was an increase in pet ownership. People were lonely. People were scared. There was a housing crisis and people couldn't pay rent. And so there was a little bit of an issue with lower income people not being able to afford their rent. And so there was policies put into place that you couldn't be kicked out of your home. There was spikes in domestic violence, drugs, alcohol, and gambling for recovering addicts. This was a real issue. There was people who lived in lower income areas and had to do, their children had to do school online. It was unfair. They didn't have the same technology that higher income people may be able to afford. There was hate crimes against Asian Americans, Muslims, Jews. That was a very common thing. Marriages had to be postponed. So there was a lot of social costs that happened with COVID-19. There was also political costs. There was protests on the restrictions. There was the whole Black Lives Matter. There was the city in Portland that like shut down, and police couldn't come in. There was elections in some parts of the globe that were postponed. Some of elections in certain places, the votings were only through the mail. I remember that we in Utah were lucky because like we already have a lot of our voting through the mail, but it was a new thing for a lot of people. There was high-profile incidents of politicians who ignored their own stay-at-home orders and contradicted health experts, which made the people not really trust in the government that they're supposed to be trusting in, especially during this scary time. And then there was the vaccine race. All the countries pulled in a lot of money to fund finding not a cure, but a vaccine to help people with this disease. And we did find one, thankfully, but we still suffer a lot of the effects that I've explained, and we're still studying the effects of COVID-19 politically, environmentally, the human cost of it. And yeah, that was it.